Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman, and I wanted to make this video about finding a community and choosing a community for the potential convert. Now, in order to choose a community, obviously one thing for sure, as I mentioned in my video about the based-in process, that you have to live in a community that has a thriving Jewish community. Now, a thriving Jewish community means there has to be at least more than one Orthodox synagogue, and there should be a school, right? Kosher food doesn't matter. There has to be a school for children to go to in order to learn about Judaism, etc. So you have to find a community that has, all these different amenities. So there are different types of synagogues. So now the obvious question would be, how does the potential convert, how do they know which community they want to be a part of, right? So first of all, you have to see where you fit in philosophically, because where you fit in philosophically will probably determine what type of community you identify with. Now, it sounds kind of silly, maybe even a little bit foolish, but also, all you men out there, whatever yarmulke, whatever skull cap, whatever you want to call it, that you wear on your head will determine which community you identify with. Do you identify with the religious Zionist community? If you do, right, then your yarmulke, your kippah, will be like a knitted kippah. Pinstripes, not pinstripes, decorations, whatever it is. If you relate more to, let's say, the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox community, so then your yarmulke will be like this, black, right? Shirt will be white, pants will be, dark black, with pinstripes, without pinstripes, blue, dark blue with pinstripes or not, gray, right? Big choice over here. Dark with pinstripes or not if you're going to wear a suit. Be that as it may, I think I would jump the gun just to drop. But there are a bunch of different communities that a person can be a part of. Now, obviously, they have to be Orthodox communities, right? We're not going to even entertain the possibility about a Reform or conservative synagogues. Those are, my language, are pretenders to the throne at best. At worst, causing certainly more problems of assimilation, intermarriage, and basically the ruining of the Jewish people, but that's not the topic for this video. So, what type of communities are out there? Probably the most visible, and this is probably where most of my students at least start. Some continue and end up there. They start usually with Chabad, right? Chabad they are chassidim, so they dress a certain way, usually black hat and blue or gray or black, suits. Some of them wear white shirts, some colored shirts, whatever it is. But they have a chassidic. They are chassidic. So they have a certain philosophical outlook. But the main thing why they're so visible is because they are in a lot of small communities all around the world. So therefore, a person's first contact, a non-Jew's first contact, probably in a community where it's not necessarily a strong community, most likely there will be a Chabad synagogue in that community. So Chabad is very big into doing Jewish outreach. They will help converts. They don't convert anybody. Some will even teach converts, but a lot won't, because their focus is really Jewish outreach. But what does Chabad do? So again, they're involved in Jewish outreach. They are interested in educating Jews, right? They'll go out to the furthest places in the world, in order to seek out Jews to teach them about Judaism. Obviously, we're talking about secular Jews here. So converts, I think for the most part, are made to feel welcome in these type of synagogues, and these type of synagogues will not have a uniform group, so to speak. You won't have people dressing the same as in a ultra-Orthodox community, which which we'll speak about. So there'll be an interesting mix of people. Some people will be, more religious, some people less religious, some people in the middle. So there's a whole cholent, there's a whole mixture of people, under one roof. So that has positives and negatives. The positive is it is, for the most part, user-friendly. Don't call me on it that, a person come in contact with a Chabad rabbi and they weren't friendly, right? But for the most part, they are friendly, they are open, they do help, and they do what they can. So most people come in contact with them first. Now, if a person, enjoys what they do and enjoys the outreach and, etc., so they want to stay Chabad, they can. Most communities have a Chabad synagogue in the community. The only problem is if that's the only synagogue in the community. In other words, if let's say there are a few Chabad synagogues in the community, but there are not any other Orthodox synagogues. There's not a Young Israel. There's not, there's no other Orthodox present. So a rabbinical court will most likely, in such a case, will tell the person they have to move. Now the reason is it has nothing to do with being against Chabad. The issue is that if, God forbid, Chabad goes out of business, then what are you supposed to do? Right? If they're the main players in the area where you want to live and there's nothing else, right? In some cases, rabbinical courts will allow you to convert in such a place. If you have kids, it'll be a bigger issue. So Chabad is usually where most people start. A number of people stay Chabad. There's nothing wrong, if you want to stay Chabad, that's fine, right? As long as, again, you're going to keep, you got to keep the Torah and do what you need to do. So, so that's really where Chabad comes in. The next category will be a modern Orthodox slash religious Zionist movement. Now, the modern Orthodox movement, we'll explain that first. They certainly believe, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that, Torah is important, there's no question, and that you have to keep Shabbos, you have to keep the mitzvahs, but there's also importance of secular studies. Now, that means that, it has a purpose in and of itself. It's not just, I have to study certain things in order to get a job, in order to have livelihood, right? We'll see the difference in philosophy between a modern Orthodox outlook and a ultra-Orthodox outlook. So they take value in secular things. In a modern Orthodox community, there will be people that will have TVs. There will be people that see movies. Will go to ball games, etc. So they do keep Shabbos. They do keep kosher. They keep other mitzvahs as well. But they put a very strong emphasis on the secular world, meaning secular education, having a degree, being a rabbi doctor or doctor rabbi, depending on your outlook. And the dress code, certainly for men, can certainly vary. There may be people that wear hats. Most people don't. They don't dress black and white, meaning white shirt, black pants. They could wear, blue shirts. Some people wear yellow shirts. Some people wear other type of shirts. And the pants won't necessarily be, dress pants. They could be cotton pants. The dress will, radically change. Again, they feel that, you don't have to be uniformed. You don't have to dress, so, doom and gloom, so to speak, and black and white. So they dress in different ways. Women also will be probably dressed a little more funky. Sometimes you'll see in some communities a woman's skirt is just above the knee, or maybe a drop below the knee. Women won't necessarily wear stockings, especially if it's hot, where in other Orthodox community they will. Women don't necessarily cover all their hair, even though there's an obligation to. You'll see women with baseball caps, half their hair uncovered, part of their hair uncovered. Again, it doesn't mean they don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep kashrus or whatever, but they have, they have a certain philosophy. And the philosophy, I would say the main part of the philosophy is that there's an incredible importance in the secular world, right? That's why there's this dichotomy where, you're religious, but at the same time, you get degrees, you do these other things, like going to sporting events and whatever. Also, got to mention also an important part, and that is Israel plays a major part, right? Israel is a major part of most people's lives. They support Israel, send their kids to Israel, they go visit Israel. So it's a major part. Now, in some communities, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but, in some communities, the emphasis is not on Torah learning. It's important. I'm not going to say it's not important, right? There's some communities take it much more serious than others, but, they have 2 feet in the secular world, a quarter of a foot in the religious world. That's the difference between them and the ultra-Orthodox. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't learn, right? Doesn't mean that they don't think it's important. It's just not as important. So then you have the religious Zionists. And the religious Zionists are similar in outlook, except that the most important mitzvah to them is the land of Israel, right? That supersedes everything. According to some, it's even more important than learning Torah. Again, that might be a little bit controversial, but if I wouldn't have heard certain things with my own ears, I wouldn't believe people could actually say it. But I'm not going to get into politics. So, building up the land of Israel is important. Visiting the land of Israel is important. Learning Torah is important. True, they don't dress, they'll dress similar to modern Orthodox, the modern Orthodox within that realm. Again, some more religious, some less religious, but there won't be a formal dress code. Most religious Zionists will wear, any number of yarmulkes on their head, whether it's a knitted yarmulke, we call it kippah sruga, whether it's one that has different designs or whatever. It's how they identify. They'll also make the point, as the modern Orthodox will also, about the importance of combining, what you learn in the secular world with Torah, but also the importance of not only building up the land of Israel, but the importance of serving in the army, right? That's a big thing, that's a big thing by them as well. Here in Israel, it's a much more volatile issue, but a person choosing a, synagogue, one of these type of modern Orthodox / religious Zionist synagogue, that's going to be an important thing. You're not living in the land of Israel, so you're not serving, but it's an important ideological idea. Again, the dress will be very different. Certainly won't be the same as Chabad, no question. Won't be the same as ultra-Orthodox. I'm not going to say that, what they wear is the most important thing, but, it's who you identify with. So if you identify more with that type of broader, let's say, broader outlook, and a more integration of these ideals with Torah, so then that might be a community that you want to check out. If you're looking for a much more narrow type, a more uniformed type of community, so then you would look at the ultra-Orthodox community. Now, an ultra-Orthodox community, why do we call them ultra-Orthodox? These names, are problematic. We're just, we don't like to label people, but sometimes it's easy to identify, where people think, where they're actually coming from, what their philosophical bent is. Doesn't mean you fit 100% in that box, but it helps identify, like, what direction, that you want to go. So an ultra-Orthodox Jew, his head covering, if he's a man, again, it would be a black yarmulke with a hat, white, black pants, or gray, dark gray, blue, dark blue, with pinstripes. That's it, right? It's uniform. Person will come to synagogue, he'll be wearing a suit, right? Or at least he'll be wearing a jacket and pants, whatever it is. But that is normally the dress code for men. Women will wear things that are, I guess in a certain way much drabbier in color. Drabbier in the sense they're not bright, not bright colors, so to speak. Certainly not red, but they're not not going to be as maybe as fashionable. In the Hasidic community, we can put the Haredi and the Hasidic community together because they basically agree on most things. Their philosophy is a little bit different. By Hasidic women, they certainly dress differently. They dress a lot more formally. The men will wear long coats and usually fur hats on Shabbos, regular, black hats on during the week, also in the ultra-Orthodox community as well. The difference, besides what they wear, is going to be their outlook vis-a-vis Torah. Now, that means that the Hasidic community is a little bit different. We'll talk about the ultra-Orthodox community for a second. That the most important thing in the ultra-Orthodox community is learning Torah. Now, other communities, learning Torah is important, right? In the modern Orthodox community, the religious Zionist community, right? No one's going to say learning Torah is not important. They just put more emphasis in secular things. Whereas in the Orthodox community, the most important thing, no question about it, is Torah scholarship. That's why most of the rabbinical authorities today are coming from that camp, because from a very young age, that's what they're taught. They're taught that there's nothing more important than learning Torah. But eventually a person's going to have to get a degree, or is going to have to do something in order to make a livelihood. That may be true, but he's only going to do it, whatever he has to do in order to make a livelihood. In other words, we're not going to equate, no one's going to equate secular studies with Torah. The difference is, the ultra-Orthodox community, Hasidim, same thing, look at the secular world as a means to help me study more Torah. In other words, the secular world is going to help me because if I have to work and I have to, bring in money to, to provide for the family. So whatever field you decide to go in, there's knowledge you need, but the knowledge isn't for the sake of the knowledge itself. Right? It's not to make me a better person. The knowledge is there to get me to the next step. The next step is whatever it is, get the degree, get a certificate, whatever it is, in order for me to make a livelihood. Other than that, it plays no significance in my life. That's what I have to do for a job, fine. Right? But once you're done, the most important thing is learning. It's not about going to seeing movies, or or going to ball games or any of that. The focus is Torah. So these elements aren't brought into the house, period. Right? Even though we may, in the ultra-Orthodox community, no one lives in a vacuum. Right? Very rare where you see people that have no idea what's going on in the world at all. Right? The difference is we try and shelter more. As much as is able to in the more modern Orthodox world. That's not the case. They're exposed to so many different things. So the emphasis on Torah is different. When it comes, again, the main difference will be how you look at secular studies. Within the ultra-Orthodox community, in the Hasidic community as well, the secular studies are a means in order for a person to provide for their family. That's it. You're not going to make a blessing, for learning Torah, and that's going to go in secular studies, right? The way the ultra-Orthodox community looks at it, that's not the case. So 2 feet are planted in the frum world, in the religious world. Okay, so you have to provide for your family, so you have to do what you need to do. So you have to learn whatever it is in order to be able to do that. So that is a major difference. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, in more modern or religious Zionist type of community, probably also will be user-friendly, probably a little more user-friendly, maybe, when it comes to converts, even though, I've heard not like that and heard other things as well. Be that as it may, I would think that it should be more welcoming, but, sometimes it's not the case. So that's the modern Orthodox. So that's the modern Orthodox community. The ultra-Orthodox community, now they'll be leery about converts as well. They may say, well, if they're all, if they're learning all the time, and that's the most important thing, at least before they have to learn for livelihood, how can they have anything common with the, the non-Jew, who wants to convert? Well, first of all, if we're talking about communities, certainly outside of Israel, even inside of Israel, for that matter, no one's living in Victorian England. No one is sitting in their own corner and has no idea what's going on. Like, they've never seen secular people in their life. They never heard of anything of professional soccer. Like, it's hard to imagine. Right? It's hard to imagine. You do have, more shelter type communities, but most communities are not. The only question is what they allow inside the house. Right? So in a more modern Orthodox community, so they'll be freer to let a lot more things in, even though that is tremendously more dangerous. The ultra-Orthodox community, the Chassidic community, is much more insular, at least, in theory. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but they're much more insular in what they let inside, inside the house. So in an ultra-Orthodox community, now, it can be user-friendly sometimes. For a convert. If you live in New York or New Jersey, most likely it's very cold, right? So it's cold not because they're ultra-Orthodox. It's cold because of New York and New Jersey. So I would never tell most people to live there. I mean, unless they were holding at a certain level. I would also never tell people, if they wanted to live in the land of Israel and they never really lived in a Jewish community. That's also, and if you have kids, it's much more complicated. Right, I'm not necessarily I might speak about that also, right? Maybe at the end we'll get to that. So in an ultra-Orthodox community outside of New York and New Jersey, right, so it may be more user-friendly than the offstandishness of New York and New Jersey, because that's just how people are in those communities. Certain communities are more open, to a certain extent, but even if you live in an ultra-Orthodox community outside of New York and New Jersey, it should be a little more user-friendly. Doesn't mean it necessarily will, but one thing in all these communities, you're going to have to work hard and persevere to, get a hold of the rabbi in that community, in order to prove that, you want to convert, you're the real deal, etc. Even actually, before I get to that, so I'll just finish up. So that's really the ultra-Orthodox community. Again, the standard when it comes to kashrus and other things will probably be on a higher level. The seriousness of learning will probably be in many ways on a higher level. It'll be a different focus than, let's say, a modern Orthodox community. Friendliness, it depends. Is an ultra-Orthodox community going to be as friendly as a Chabad community? Probably not. But, again, it depends. It depends where. It can be. But it depends where, because just like in any Jewish community, they're going to be leery of somebody coming in. Why in the world would you want to convert to Judaism? After all, look what the Jewish people have gone through throughout the millennia. So they're going to look at you like you're a wacko, because anyone who wants to convert to Judaism today, either you're a wacko or you're the real deal. It's one, it's one or the other. So an ultra-Orthodox community could be user friendly, but you have to buy into the mentality. Like any of these groups, you have to buy into the mentality of who these people are and where they're coming from and what your goal is and where you see it. Where you see that's going to be the best fit for your family. Now, for some people, a more rigid lifestyle, more focused lifestyle, right, on in learning and in dress or whatever, So an ultra-Orthodox, outlook is good. If you're looking, to be a little more chilled and you want to wear what you want and you want to ease your way in or whatever, could be a non-Orthodox community is better. A Hasidic community. Now, again, most, between the Hasidim, between the ultra-Orthodox, which really part of the Hasidim also, and the modern Orthodox, they basically agree on 95% or close to 100% of what Judaism teaches, right? There are differences, there are variances. A lot of people that I've dealt with like to be part of Hasidic communities because they feel that the ultra-Orthodox community, what we call the yeshivish community, which the focus is on learning, is a little bit dry, right? That may be true. They may like, sing and dance a little more, a little bit, he's supposed to do is being alone, go out to nature. There are people that are more, touchy-feely, not as, they don't come to Judaism as a, through an intellectual pursuit. So, the ultra-Orthodox can be dry. Prayers can be dry. A lot of things of what goes on in that community can be dry. That's why there are a number of people that are, they're interested in being part of either Chabad or, let's say, Breslov. A lot of people get into the Breslov Chassidus because, again, it's a lot of introspection. There's a lot going out to nature. You have to dress a certain way. It's a little more freer in that sense. Emphasis also on learning. You don't have, you don't necessarily have Breslov communities in the States. You have pockets here and there, fit in with other Hasidic groups, in different places. But, more, I think, there are more people that are attuned, to that because, they learn chassidish, so they learn, God's purpose in the world, why He created it, what our purpose is, how to be in touch with Him, and be in touch with ourselves, and do what we need to do, and not just a higher level, but it's like a different plane in a certain way. It's more esoteric. It's not just learn, halacha, chumash, and it's a little bit, it's a little bit freer. It gives, it lets you chill out a little bit, take in nature, other things that bring you to a higher awareness, right? Nothing wrong with that. If that's what a person enjoys, right? And that's going to bring them closer to God. So then, you want to be around people that are more in tune to that. Again, ultra-Orthodoxy is more dry, there's no question. And that can be a turnoff. It can be a major turnoff. It's very heavy. Extremely heavy. Now, some people might enjoy, the heaviness and striving and learning and sweating and, and all that. Right? Whereas, by Breslov and by, Chabad, it's more laid back. It's definitely, even though Chabad dresses the way they do, right? They still certainly, black hat, and they wear blue or black. They might have a colored shirt, but, they certainly have a Orthodox outlook, no question. But it's, it's a little more chilled, a little more laid back, because, again, they're doing outreach. So they're trying to bring other Jews, closer. So, they'll sing a little more, they'll dance a little more, they'll have, other activities. But again, they won't go as far, like the modern Orthodox, so they'll bring a TV in the house and start showing movies. It's different. Right? So when it comes to these type of Hasidic communities, but again, some of them are like really, really straight or whatever, and everyone dresses the same. You have one Rebbe and whatever. Some people, that's too intense to a certain extent. Others, really enjoy it. You have to, I've given a little bit, overview, of that. I think also other Hasidic groups, Breslov as well, are much more, I think they're much more open-minded in that sense. I think, many converts could fit in, much easier. Again, the question is, what is the, what's the focus? And the best part of all this is you can take a little bit from everybody. You can take the singing and dancing from the chassidish, you can take the learning from the, from the ultra-Orthodox, and all that. The thing is that at some point, if you have kids, you have to figure out which direction to go. Because, you have to educate your kids. Now, your kids might not fit into one. You may be ultra-Orthodox and want to be chassidic, right? So, you got to be open for that. Or you want to be more modern, and they want to be ultra-Orthodox. So, you got to see, not everybody fits the same. Not everybody is a cookie cutter. So, that being said, those are probably the major demarcations between the different groups, give or take. Now, the other thing is about communities is that the most important thing when you're trying to figure out where you fit in, and if you do fit into a certain quote-unquote mold, right? So if you're inclined to move to a certain community, call people up in that community. Find people, that you can speak to, that can tell you about the community and what to expect and whatever, and then go see it. Right? So, one thing you have to do, and you didn't hear this from me, but when you contact a community and you contact a rabbi, now you're not going to tell them you want them to be your sponsoring rabbi, right? They're not going to do that. A sponsoring rabbi means someone on the ground that's going to vouch for what you do, right? They're going to say that you keep Shabbos, you keep kashrus. You need someone else to teach you. That sponsoring rabbi might not be the one that's going to teach you, right? That sponsoring rabbi may vouch for you because he's on the ground, but then you may take my classes, let's say, and I would write a letter, and both of us will work together, and eventually a person will go to the rabbinical court, the Beis Din, and convert. But the thing is that you have to contact, the rabbis in that, in that city, and you have to be diligent because they may just, they may not answer emails. They may have something on Facebook or whatever. They may not get back to you, whatever. You have to be diligent, not obnoxious, but. You get a hold of somebody, you should tell them, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm interested in, I'm taking these classes or not, or whatever. And, I'm very much interested in coming to this community. Whether they'll help you straight away or not, or, whatever they'll tell you. The thing is that you have to contact them. Right? It's a little bit maybe unnerving, maybe embarrassing, right? But at the end of the day, you need to get your foot in the door. In other words, you have to tell them, I'm learning, this is what I'm doing, I'm taking these classes, whatever, and say, I want to come to your community, right? I'm seriously considering coming to your community, right? If you're not considering moving, this video, should have mentioned at the beginning, this video is not for me. You have to be, at some point, on the way to moving to a community, this is how you're going to choose. So you try and get a hold of one of the, the rabbis in the city, try and, get him on the phone for a few minutes at least, see what's going on there. Can he help you? Can he put you in contact with somebody, that could give you more time, to give you more of a feel of what's going on? Then once you hear what's going on, and you get a feel, say, oh, this is something I think we'd be interested in. So then you got to go check it out. Again, hearing something is not the same as seeing it. It'd be good, if possible, get set up for Shabbos. Right? See if you can get set up for Shabbos and see what goes on. Right? You see how the synagogue is. See how people pray there. You see what the classes are like there. You see how Shabbos is. You see if this is really where where you fit in. And if it's not a good fit, okay. But it's, before you make the decision to say, okay, I'm going to call this rabbi and, in this community, whatever, think about what you're looking for. Right? That's the most important thing. Think about, where am I right now? Where's my family? If you have a family, where are we holding? Are we stronger? Are we weaker? Are we going to fit in this type of community? Not fit in this type of community? You have to write down a list. Make a checklist. Right? Make a checklist. Most important things. Right? Community warmth, learning, modesty, whatever. Make your list and weight it. In other words, if living in a community where learning, like an ultra-Orthodox community, like that's the most important thing, then learning gets a 10. Modesty gets a 10. Seeing movies gets a 0. Right? So then you have to make a decision. Right? Then you'll see the pros and the cons. right? You'll see what's weighted and what's not. And then you try and find a community nearby, right? A community nearby, right? Nearby, and then go and, check it out. Read up about the community, see what Jewish things are going on, what Orthodox Jewish things are going on. Might be, in certain communities, they have multiple things going on. You might have one Orthodox community there. There's a Chabad community there. Might be no ultra-Orthodox community in bigger cities, in bigger places. You're going to have more of a choice. And problem is, in these bigger places, you want to move near to a synagogue, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. That's the reality also. That's why some people don't even, can't even start this process, because, some people can't move. And it's an impossibility. So if you're one of the fortunate ones that you can move and it's not that far away and it's not that, not that dramatic, to do such a thing, then you have to look at the whole picture. You have to look where you came from. You have to see where you're going. You have to see where you are now and what you're going to fit in now. So it could be, you may say, I'm really holding like right here, like at the bottom. Do I want to move to one community and move up a little bit? Or do I want to like start at the bottom and just work my way up and, and become much stronger along the way? And, work my way up slowly. So, another important factor, again, is going to be, not just how you look at things and what's important, but are you interested in being in a uniform place? Meaning that if things are uniform and people eat, let's say, certain rabbinic supervision, they don't rely on these leniencies, they have a certain standard. Right? In an Orthodox community, a Hasidic community, there'll be a certain standard. In a more modern Orthodox community, it's less of a standard. It doesn't mean they don't have any standard. The standard's not the same. It's much more open in that sense. Whereas in an ultra-Orthodox community, there'll be certain rabbinic supervision that is accepted and certain rabbinic supervision that's not. And therefore, if you want people to come eat at your house, after conversion obviously, if you want them to come eat at your house, you have to have the supervision they're going to eat. You can't say, well, I'm going to make whatever I want, and if they eat it, fine. If not, not. Right? That's not going to do anything. If there's a uniform thing, you don't want to stick out any more than you're going to. So therefore, if it's uniform, you have to do what they do. You have to wear what they wear. You can't go outside these boundaries. Because if you go outside these boundaries, it's going to be a nightmare. If there's a place that's a lot more open, if it's a lot more open, and it's much more relaxed in different ways, whether it comes to rabbinical supervision, whether it comes to dress or whatever, and that's where you're holding now, so that's the type of community you should be in. Even if you're striving to be, you want to be at a more higher level, it could be, it's better to start in such a place. Just keep in mind and understand what the mentality is. Because the mentality is everything. If you don't, I'll give one example. If you don't want a TV in your house or your kids watching movies, certain communities don't move into. Because that'll be the norm. And then the kids will feel out of place. You'll say, but they're Jews, they keep Shabbos, why can't we do what they do? So you run into a problem. Even if you live, let's say, in an ultra-Orthodox type of community, and you have a higher standard, you may have a higher standard, and you'll say, well, these people are, like us, why don't we do that? So that's not exactly the same. It's not going to be the same dynamics as, someone going to movies or a ball game, or, people doing other things, right? It's a totally different, dynamic. So obviously, yourself, since I don't, and I don't know how many people are going to be watching this, so I get to, well, you probably fit in better here. You probably fit in there. You probably, you can't do that, because I don't know who the you is over here. I mean, it could be, all three of us, me, myself, and I. So I can tell you where I fit in, being in one community, going to another, right? So for me, I had a certain standard what I was trying to strive for, and I found it. But again, you have to know and be honest with yourself and what you can handle. I mean, if you think you can handle it, so keep in mind you're going to be part of this community. Right? Once you move, it's not so easy to move again. You certainly want to minimize moves, even though I've moved around the world a few times. You certainly want to minimize that as much as possible. In other words, if you're going to move to a certain community and you have a choice between a smaller community and a bigger community, the smaller community may not be accepted by a rabbinical court. Right? Let's just say there's only Chabad there. They won't accept it because it needs to be, if you don't have kids to deal with or whatever, right? It may not be accepted. So you may have to move to a bigger community. In a bigger community, it's got all the amenities. It's got schools and other things. So then that's the most logical choice, because moving costs money. And that being said, you want to try and minimize moves. I spoke to someone a number of years ago, and where they lived, there was basically nothing. Where they were moving to was a step up, but it was also basically very, very small. So even though they had a school there, whatever, I tried to tell them. I was pretty blunt, and say eventually the rabbinical court's probably going to make you move again. If you want to move again, okay. If you're not opposed to that, it's probably better not to have to go through it more than once. If you feel this is a good stepping stone, you have to, whatever. I'm still not 100% convinced that that's the case. But if somebody does it, that's their choice. We want to minimize, and this cannot be underemphasized. You want to minimize the times you're moving around, right? Especially if you have kids, right? It throws off kids quite a bit, I should know. Thank God I came back to, I moved 2 continents in 3 years. From Israel, South America to Lakewood, New Jersey back to Israel. So, thank God my kids came back intact. That's pretty miraculous. I did that within 3 years. Left with 5 kids, came back with 6. So, that type of thing I wouldn't recommend. Right? But if you're going from, within the same state, or not that far, maybe a state over, or whatever, from where you are, fine. Right? Making monumental steps. Oh, something else. One other thing I forgot to mention was about the land of Israel. Now, I would never tell anyone to move here for a number of reasons. If you've never lived in a Jewish community, because here it's much more black and white. There is a religious Zionist community in different places. It's getting smaller. It's not growing. So it's either you're ultra-Orthodox or you're nothing. That's just what it is. There is a little bit of a middle ground, but not very much. And within Israeli ultra-Orthodox society, you're going to have problems. That's one issue. It's much more extreme. Second issue is the language, right? You got to learn the language. Third issue, maybe almost most important, is making a livelihood here, right? It's very difficult. So you might say, well, if I live in the States and I got 3-4 kids and they're gonna go to yeshiva and have tuition, whatever, it's gonna cost me a lot. Yeah, that's true. But there you're making more money. Even if you say, wow, it's going to cost me $10,000 or whatever a year, right? People are making more money there, even though people are getting crunched, because of tuition. So here, everything's a lot less. It's just you make a lot less, right? There are benefits to being here. It's definitely the strongest Jewish community in the world, no question about it. There are a lot of benefits of being, living in the palace of the king. There's a lot of, there's danger. There's also danger, but again, culture shock is the most important thing here. If you don't speak the language and your kids have never learned, and your kids are over a certain age, it's an impossibility to come here. It just makes things much, much more difficult. Now, I've had people come here. I'm not going to say not, but I would never recommend anyone to do that unless it's under certain circumstances and they absolutely 100% know what in the world they're getting themselves into. Because I see more often than not parents that come from the States and the kids are older, over the age of 9. And even if they've learned, in Jewish schools in America, even strong Jewish schools, kids can get totally messed up here because they feel they don't really fit in. Not really Israeli and they're not really American. Right? And a lot of these kids end up falling by the wayside because they have no peer group here. That's a major issue. Major issue. So, anyone who's thinking of coming to Israel, think once, think twice, think 100 times, before you do it to your, if you have kids, especially, before you decide to do that. Because again, the land of Israel is a land of extremes. In America, even in the ultra-Orthodox communities, let's say, it's not the same as being in Israel. It's not, the mentality is very, very different. So, as difficult as it may seem to fit in like that type of community, in America, multiply it by infinity, the difficulty here. I'm not saying it can't happen. But you have many, many more obstacles to go through. Again, language barrier, livelihood, those two right there. And if your kids are older, if you have kids, you're playing Russian roulette. Even though there are schools for that, are now being geared for kids don't necessarily fit in the system or other things. They're still a little bit behind the times, but they are certainly learning that not everyone, fits into a certain, to a certain box. But it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. Then what can happen is you have a situation where you gave up everything to come to Israel and your kids came out cracked. Now, one other point I will make just about that is anyone who does convert, so in order to come to Israel, you need to live wherever you are. You have to live in that state at least for another year before making aliyah, before coming to Israel. So that's another, this is something else to keep in mind, that right after conversion you can't come to Israel, right? In most cases that won't be allowed unless, let's say you have one Jewish parent, then you come back on the law of return, so that wouldn't matter. But it's more, it's definitely a little more complicated. Not only that, when you go through conversion, one of the things you want to keep in mind is when you go to rabbinical court, is that the rabbinical court should be accepted in the land of Israel. Because if it's not, you're going to have other issues. You're going to have a lot of other issues, which I'm not even going to go into. Maybe I'll speak about it in another video. But those are the different communities. I think I hit all of them. I hope I did them justice. Where you have Chabad, the modern Orthodox / religious Zionist communities. You have the ultra-Orthodox community, Hasidic community, different types of Hasidic communities, and you have the community in the land of Israel. So I hope that helps in in making a decision, a clear-cut decision of where a person thinks they're going to fit in and exactly how to go about it.